Well, good morning, everyone. It is just now 8 o'clock in Nevada, and I hear it's going to be about the same temperature this week in Minnesota as it is here. So it's not so bad to come home on Thursday after being gone for a month. Today, I want to focus on some aspects of prayer that are maybe just very obvious, but maybe not. Um, my own journey started in public ministry in 1970. So do the math, that was 52 years ago. And as I look back over the 52 years, it has been in the last 5 to 10 years that I have had a deeper awareness of human need than I think I've ever had, almost to the point of becoming overwhelming. I think part of this is because I left teaching at a university, which should drive anybody into prayer. Um, but moving into chaplaincy, where I was dealing with a different kind of human need every day, and then as a spiritual director, dealing with another aspect of human need, I found, because I psychologically have a tendency to be a rescuer who wants to come in and fix everything. I have found things to be sometimes pretty overwhelming. And then the other factor is I became involved in contemplative prayer, which in the last 10 years is something new for me. And I'm finding that contemplative prayer, as many of the authors write, causes us to see things differently. It changes our view, and we see many things through the eyes of Jesus, which means as the crowds gathered around Jesus, if anybody had a reason to be overwhelmed by human need, it would be Jesus himself. And so you begin to see the hungry person that you didn't see before. You begin to see the hurting person that you didn't see before. And you begin to realize that sometimes you can't see that people are hurting, but they still are. And so they're there for us. So as I've thought about today, taking a different look at prayer, because the other thing that can happen to us in prayer is that we get in a rut. We pray the same things every time, which is not bad, but it keeps us from having a broader and deeper prayer experience. So I got to thinking about prayer books and want to take a little bit different road with that today. Thinking of the Swiss theologian and pastor Karl Barth, who supposedly wrote, "We must hold the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other." This statement has been used to emphasize a concept of preaching in which the preacher connects the Word of God to life events. It is an incarnational understanding of preaching that demonstrates how Christ is fully present in the world. The concept of incarnational preaching, I believe, also applies to prayer. How does one pray in context? More specifically, how does one pray? Is there a right way, a wrong way? In Luke 11:1, it is recorded, one of his disciples said to him, "Lord, teach us to pray." The disciples noticed that Jesus had a different kind of prayer life than what they saw around them, and they wanted to know more. So people of faith want to learn how to pray, but sometimes make the process of prayer to be very complicated, when in reality, prayer is very organic. Now, I'd like for you to just stop for a minute, and if you've got some paper or whatever, just jot down thoughts that come to mind about the Karl Barth quote of holding the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other. So let's just take a couple of minutes to ponder that.
Where the call of the Christian is not to like live in the woods in solitude and not talk to anyone or have a clue what's going on. And I'm reading Bonhoeffer right now, so that's influencing my thoughts on it too. But when we neglect our neighbor, we're not, I feel like we're not living out our faith, right? That Jesus was like a good neighbor. He really loved and cared for people and was unaware what was going on. And I think sometimes I think, oh, I just need to like get away and let go of this stuff and connect with God. And it's like, it's not that simple.
You're sounding an awful lot like Luther. He really, one of his
I don't know. Thank you.
It's one of his chief complaints about cloistered monasticism was they were isolated from the world, and he said the Christian is called to be in the midst of it all. And so I think you make a great point, which is a prayer book I don't have included today, but walking down the street or sitting in a shopping mall and praying for people as they go by is, I think, kind of what you're saying. And I like that. Well, and that is a good point. In fact, in some of the writings I looked at, that's where they criticize the Karl Barth quote, because we have a tendency to, what they would say is look at it backwards, which is what you're saying. And so the ones who like the quote say that we must approach world news with the Bible, and we interpret it through the Bible. And in terms of that, like Pastor John was preaching this morning in that concept of grace wins. And so I think you make a very good point with that. The exegesis is of the scriptural text, not of the newspaper. And that's kind of what you're saying, isn't it? Okay, well, thanks for bringing that up. Well, as we kind of move along, Jesus grew up learning Jewish prayers. And I've been watching a British television show called A Place to Call Home that has a lot of Jewish themes in it. And it really emphasizing that Jews are defined for themselves in their prayer life and prayer rituals, which I'd never thought about before. But that's what Jesus grew up with. Rituals and traditions of the Jewish faith are viewed as what shapes, forms, and defines a Jew. So in the Jewish tradition, it is taught that one can pray anytime, anywhere, with whatever form comes from the heart. However, in addition to this, a Jew will have certain prayers and rituals that are prayed in Hebrew and with certain actions. So the pattern of prayer is a strong theme in the musical Fiddler on the Roof, which is in my top 5 favorite musicals, and I love musicals. I personally love the prayer style of Tevye, which includes the formal Jewish prayers, while he also includes his ongoing dialogue with God regarding the everyday issues of life. And so Tevye prays for the healing of his horse's leg because he's tired of pulling his own milk cart. And he has prayers with family issues, and oh my goodness, are his children challenging him. And at times, Tevye in the film stands and shakes his fist at God and essentially says, "What are you trying to do to me here?" It's very organic and it's very contextual, and he doesn't hesitate to express his direct feelings to God. I love that relational aspect of prayer between Tevye and God. Hebrew tradition and Lutheran tradition view prayer as an expression of a parental relationship. Luther writes in his introduction to the Lord's Prayer, with these words, God tenderly invites us to believe that he is our true Father and that we are his true children, so that with all boldness and confidence, we may ask him as dear children ask their dear Father. Now, obviously, Luther is not using contemporary language. because we would be much more gender inclusive and speak in terms of parent, but it does express the relationship, whether it's mother or father or both, that exists between God and us. And so we take both joys and sorrows to God and can speak with God in conversational tones about issues of daily life. Now, this particular picture is, I found this poster when I was doing an internship visit out in California, and I had to have it. For me, it expresses first article. God richly and daily provides all that I need, but it also, for me, is the introduction to the Lord's Prayer. This is how I can snuggle up with God and have a time of conversation. I was, Abba means daddy, and so um, this is a time for conversation with my parent, my God. So I'd like for us to take just a moment and for you to look. We're going to do a little form of Visio Divina here, but to take a look at this picture and reflect on it. How does it express a relationship with God and a relationship with God in prayer? So let's take just a few minutes to ponder that. Again, what do you see? What do you feel? What triggers your thoughts here? By the way, many people do not like this picture. I just happen to. So if you have negative thoughts, feel free to share those too there.
I would just add, like, especially in light of our gospel today, like the fierceness of a parent's love. And it's not something you mess with. So this picture, I just see so much of like protection and just like the power of love that we I think we relate to as parents, but we underestimate as being the newborn in God's arms and in our faith lives.
Yeah, I think in some respects that's what Jesus means when he refers to us as children. It's not anything demeaning. It's a trust relationship, which brings me a lot of comfort when I get overwhelmed by human care. And I would not want to be between you and Ziva if she was being threatened in any way, because I would be smashed. Yep, that's it. Well, this is what we think of in terms of contextual prayer. And I believe contextual prayer in some respects has grown in importance, at least for me, over the last 2 years with this pandemic and everything else. And I really appreciated what Pastor John was talking about this morning, of kind of praying that Putin gets back what he's giving, and that it's not vindictive. And so I felt very reaffirmed by some of my feelings about all of that. But I think we sometimes tend to do what I call generic prayers and not enough incarnational praying. It's one thing to pray for world peace, but it's another thing to pray specifically about issues of Ukraine and the children and blessing them. And Christ comes into the world to walk with people, like Nina was saying earlier, through every step of their lives. And so I don't just want to pray for the peace throughout the world. I want to pray for Afghan refugees and Ukrainian refugees in the context of their lives. So how does one do that? The invitation to incarnational prayer takes us from praying generically for world peace to praying for the end of violence in Kiev, or the end of animosity in the family that lives next door. God, of course, can bring world peace, but our prayer in specific situations helps reinforce the concept that God walks with us in specific situations. And so I read this. I like the idea that these prayer sprints, times of urgent, get in there and pray for somebody, help us to see that God is present in all things. So, what about prayer books? Well, as I think about prayer books, I have found myself praying the newspaper. I pray for the headlines, but at times God calls me to pray for specific people and events. I did youth ministry for 40 years or so. So when I look at the Forest Lake Times, I am drawn to the athletic pages. Don't tell John I said that, but I am drawn there, not to pray for a sports team, but to pray a blessing on the young people that are presented in those pictures, for example. Uh, I know of one church that got the class pictures for all the kids in the high school, posted them up in a room. I don't think we could do that today because of privacy laws, and people would take turns praying for various students in that high school. That contextualizes. And so sometimes I look at the headlines, but I also find that many times I'm praying the obituaries. I don't read all of them, but there's some that you just are, I am drawn to pray for the families, for the grief, for the pain, and give thanksgiving for the person who is recorded in that obituary. Um, I want to pray for those who are mourning. I also find the evening news for me has become an emotional experience in the last few years. Sometimes I find myself weeping in the middle of the news, especially when I hear of tragic situations. And so I pray through the evening newscast. That becomes my prayer book. Um, Sometimes as I do this, I ask God's blessings upon people and events. And I don't necessarily tell God the specifics because God knows what to do better than I do. But I do pray blessing upon them and commend them to God's care. I was watching the news last night with all the children in these relocation centers in Poland and or the Afghan children who have been uprooted, and think of my own grandchildren and what would I pray for them as I if they were in these situations. Or I saw a thing on, I think, Facebook, a video of the little girl in the bomb shelter who is singing that song. I can never remember the name of it, but it's from that movie Frozen that all the children just love. And she's singing in a beautiful soprano voice, and the entire bomb shelter just goes quiet listening to her. My granddaughter loves that song, so I immediately, engaged in that kind of prayer with them. Um, it is a prayer of blessing, but it's contextual. It's and so we take from the liturgy, for whom do the people of God pray? And let's just take a moment to reflect on that. How do those prayer books that I mentioned in this slide, how do they speak to you? And for whom do the people of God pray? Let's just take a moment with that. And a moment is all we have. So do that on your own. I have one other that I want to get to, and that's the social media icons. Facebook for me has become a prayer book. Now, it's an interesting prayer book. Like this last week, a former student of mine, his daughter went into some kind of they don't even know what caused it, but she lost all focus. Her cognition was decreasing. They couldn't find what it was, and then she suddenly snapped out about it. But I've been praying for her and that family all week. But last night, I really got challenged on this one because I have a love-hate relationship with Facebook. And I posted yesterday a meme or whatever they're called that I thought was positive and led to an attitude of gratitude. And the next thing I know, there are 3 people doing replies to that post that were really kind of mean, in my opinion. And they got into this argument about, politics and blah, blah, blah. And every time I tried to clear it up, it wasn't working. So I figured out how to delete it because I thought I don't want this on my page. But for me, the prayer challenge is to pray about my attitude for those people that got on there with all that negativity. And so Facebook becomes a prayer book for me, my attitude, and for all the human need that's expressed. And I have managed to take us to the point that 2 minutes passed when we're supposed to quit. So any thoughts that jump out at you at this point, and then we'll go as we need to. We go forth with incarnational prayer, and sometimes it's a primal scream, and sometimes it's gentle blessing. But may God grant you a gentle blessing during this next week. Take care. Thank you so much for being here. Bye.